Hey guys, welcome back. So today I'm working on this Generac XG10000E. This machine produces 10,000 continuous watts and is powered by a Generac made V-twin engine. Now this actually doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Jason. He's a local guy who buys and sells power equipment, and he only spent $500 on this machine. You know, brand new, they're over 2,000. And this one is basically brand new. You know, according to the clock, there's only 67 hours of runtime on this machine. So, yeah, in this condition, this age, this is still a $1,000+ machine. Now, of course, it wouldn't be here if it didn't have a problem. And the problem is the governor. It's not controlling the engine speed at all. It's running close to 6,000 RPM. And I'm kind of surprised it hasn't thrown a rod yet. You know, I'm tempted to start it up just to show you guys what it's doing, but I don't want to be the one who blows up this engine. I think it would be better to figure out what the problem is before trying to start this machine. So potentially we have to open that engine and replace the governor, or maybe it's a simple fix. You know, that's what we're going to find out. So let me set up a little bit better. We'll get this up on the lift and dig in, see if we can't figure out what is wrong with this governor system. It's a pretty heavy generator to get up on the lift. And I was a little bit wary of this handle setup. This is the one that Generac had a recall on. People were losing fingers on it. And it has to do with this push button design. This push button, it's supposed to pop out and hold things in place. And what often happens is that it doesn't pop out, or it pops out but doesn't apply enough pressure. So it kind of pops back in when you're actually trying to use the handle to move the generator around. Now, the fix is to drill a hole and insert a bolt or a pin, which it looks like someone has already done. So that should be safe, assuming those bolts don't fall out. A better way to do it would probably be to drill straight down. That way gravity holds it in, and there's really no chance of that coming out. Anyway, to get access to the governor linkage, it's right by the carburetor, which is on top of the engine on this model. You can just kind of see it. Looking in down here, it's right on the other side of the exhaust pipe there. So to gain access to it, I need to get the tank out of the way. And in order to do that, I need to disconnect the vent, pull this panel off, and actually disconnect the fuel line as well. So I think I'm going to start there. I'm going to drain the tank of fuel. You know, this right here just pushes through, and we can disconnect the line right there and drain the tank. And once all that fuel is out, we'll just remove a few bolts and get that tank out of the way. So that is the fuel valve. The line on the right goes to the tank. So we'll disconnect the one on the left. The fuel valve's turned off right now, so if it works, we shouldn't make a big mess. Only about 4 liters came out, and it looks pretty good. There's no water and no debris. So we're off to a good start. You got to be careful getting this hose off. This is just a small plastic barb, and a lot of times they're broken on generators I get. So be gentle. Wow. I feel like I'm going to break this one. It's needing way too much force. I do see some signs of issues here. Not necessarily governor related, but something happened. This is the knob for removing the top of the airbox, and it looks like it melted. Maybe it was on fire, and we're missing a whole chunk of the cover here. You know, it doesn't look like it was chewed off by a mouse, so I don't know if that was on fire or kind of what the story is. But it's actually in the area we're suspicious of. You can't actually see the governor arm yet, but you can see the throttle linkage right there. So I'm just moving the governor arm so it's not bound up. So still nothing obvious going on here, but the fact that we have some obvious signs of damage in this area gives me a little bit of hope that maybe we're dealing with an external problem. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so that is very suspicious. No critters in the airbox. This is the other line of the tank vent. We'll get that out of the way, and let's just move the linkage again. Yeah. No obvious issue. So I'm going to get the borescope and just peek down there. I want to see the condition of the throttle plates, make sure they are closing all the way, that they're both there. I mean, potentially one could have fallen off. So let's take a peek. All right, let's see what we can see here. And it's going to be hard to get a full view of the throttle plate, but we can see one of them. So let me close the plate. Yep, and that one's attached and seems to be closing. So let's check the other plate over here. Yeah, no issues. It seems like that throttle can open and close fully. So that's not the issue. Well, so far things are checking out. You know, that said, the more I think about the throttle plates, the more I'm suspicious of them. Although they're moving and they seem to be closing most of the way, they're not closing all the way. And an engine like this, and really any generator engine, the throttle plates have to be able to close all the way, because when the engine runs without a load, it gets its fuel from the pilot jet, which is actually in front of the throttle plates. And if those plates can't close all the way, the engine certainly can run too fast. And if you look at the idle set screw, this generator does not idle, and it is driven down. I would say more than it should be, at least more than I would drive it down. So that is actually going to limit how far the throttle plates can close. So it's quite possible there's nothing wrong with this generator. Someone might have been messing around with the idle set speed and they set the minimum speed too fast. And that almost kind of makes sense as far as why part of the airbox is missing. If you look, the chunk that's missing is right where that idle set screw is. So potentially someone was messing around with that idle set screw. They didn't take the tank off. They needed to gain access, so they broke a piece away or melted a piece away and made some adjustments, and that could explain what's going on here. At least that's my hope. So I think what I'm going to do now is check the oil and start this engine. I want to see if the throttle plate is moving. What should happen is when I start the engine, the governor closes the throttle. And if we see that happen and the engine's still running fast, then we know it's an issue with the idle set screw. So let's check the oil real quick, make sure we're good there, and we'll try to start this. Actually, before I check the oil and start the engine, I'm going to quickly explain how the governor system works. You know, its main responsibility is to control the engine speed and maintain it at a set point. So you have a governor rod which connects over to the throttle plate on the carburetor. And this spring you will find on pretty much every four-stroke engine outside of the engine. And this pulls the throttle plate open. So right now with the engine off, this is the only force involved in moving this governor arm. So if I close the throttle and let go, it snaps right back into full open throttle. It's the part that's inside the engine whose responsibility is to slow it down. If you follow the shaft down into the engine, there is a paddle on the end of that shaft, and that's resting against the internal governor. And this spins with the engine. So the faster the engine spins, the faster this gear spins. And what happens is once it runs fast enough, these weights start to push out. And the faster the engine runs, the harder these push out. And as they come out, it raises this plunger and it pushes the paddle and can start to close that throttle plate. And eventually an equilibrium is found where if the engine starts to slow down, this runs slower, it reduces the force. The spring is allowed to open the throttle a bit more until things balance out again. So when I start the Generac, one of two things are going to happen. Either the throttle plate isn't going to move at all, which tells me this part inside the engine is either broken or miscalibrated, where this paddle is just too far away and this can influence it. If we do see the throttle plate move and the engine's still running fast, then most likely it's just the idle set screw. So let's check the oil, get the engine started, and see which it is. Yeah, oil looks clean, right to the full line. So it should be safe to start. Most likely the carburetor's full of fuel, so I'm not going to hook up a fuel supply. It should be enough to run it for a few seconds. And I'm going to set you guys up right here. Keep a close eye on this throttle plate. We want to see if it moves when the engine starts. And I've also connected an inductive tachometer so we can get a read on what the engine speed is. Definitely running fast. You know, I started the engine with the choke on. The engine speed was under control, under 3,600 RPM. And as soon as I turned that choke off, the engine speed increased very quickly. As soon as I saw 4,300 RPM on that tachometer, I quickly shut things down. But I got the information I needed. The throttle plate, it did move. but it didn't hit the idle set screw. Instead, it actually just went about halfway, and then it stopped moving. So there's really only two possibilities here. Either there's way too much spring tension, and it just can't overcome it, which it doesn't feel like it. But that is a possibility. I think the more likely possibility is that the calibration is off. You know, this piece right here, this plunger, can only move a tiny bit. And if the paddle is just a little bit too far away, then the travel will be limited and it can't fully close the throttle plate. So I think I'm going to start with the easy thing here and just loosen up that spring tension a bit. We'll restart it, see if that makes any difference. And I don't think it's gonna. So if that's the case, then we'll get the airbox off and we'll get better access to the governor arm and the governor rod and try resetting it so that the calibration is better. And at that point, it should hopefully be able to control the engine speed better. Actually, I'm going to skip making that adjustment on the spring. I don't think that's the issue, because if an equilibrium wasn't reached, then the throttle plate would not have moved. You know, I think we just don't have enough throw. I think the calibration on that governor is the problem. Just be careful with these. They can fall in to the carburetor or the intake manifold pretty easily. I've done it before. Yikes. So I actually closed the choke to help avoid that. And to finish getting this airbox off, there's actually two more bolts on the bottom underneath the airbox, and they're actually just long Phillips screws. You can kind of see one there on the top right of your screen. They're very difficult to get to, so let me see if I can come up with something to reach in there to get those out. So now we have a little bit better access to what we need here. Not great. You know, this generator, I would say, is not an easy one to work on. Anyway, before you do anything, I guess the disclaimer here is that don't make adjustments to your governor unless you're absolutely sure, because a very small mistake can make a big difference in the way the engine speed is maintained. As you can see on this generator right here, it actually has partial control of the throttle. If it had no control at all, this engine would most likely be completely blown up at this point. So before making an adjustment, just make sure you know which way is full throttle and which way is idle. So in this, I know this is idle. It pushes it against the idle set screw. And when I let up, the governor arm, which you can just see there, rotates counterclockwise. So what I want to do next is loosen up that bolt right there. And once that's loose, you know, just make sure we're in wide open throttle, which we should be, because that spring is holding the throttle in that position. And then rotate the shaft. You can just see it right there, counterclockwise. And while holding that counterclockwise and making sure this is in full throttle, tighten down the bolt on the shaft that goes into the engine. And that should reset the calibration. So that is what I'm going to try. And for this, I'm going to have to talk you through what I'm doing. There's just no way to get the camera in close. So I'm going to actually just mark with the Sharpie where things are at right now. And after making the adjustment, I'm actually not expecting to see much of a change, because we're talking like less than a degree difference in the orientation of the shaft versus the arm. But if things go terribly wrong, I'll at least have that mark to get us back pretty close. So I'm just going to loosen up this bolt a bit. And actually, it's not that tight. So that's actually a good sign. That tells me that most likely things did slip a little bit out of place. So I loosened it a bit. Might have to loosen it a little bit more. And we want to go counterclockwise. And it did turn, just a tiny bit. So I think we're going to luck out on this one. Now there is a torque spec for this on most engines. I don't have it for this one. You definitely want it tight though, because the force involved here can definitely cause the governor arm to slip on the shaft. And that's exactly what happened with only 67 hours on this machine. So that feels nice and tight. So I'm just going to add a couple nuts right here. We'll tighten the carb back down. I'm going to run it just like this. There's no point putting it back together. And hopefully we have better control of the engine speed this time. Yeah, I just wanted to show you real quick the adjustment I made. If you look at the governor shaft, it has a screwdriver slot on the top. And that black mark on the arm was aligned with the slot. And the adjustment I made turned the shaft very slightly counterclockwise, and now you see the alignment is different. And that's it. It's a very small adjustment. In this position, it should run perfectly. If that shaft is in any other position, the governor is not going to have control of the engine speed. So let's tighten the carb down and try this again. Good enough. Let's try this again. Hopefully we see somewhere around 3,600 RPM. What the hell was that? That hurt. I think that was a good test. The engine started, it didn't over rev when I turned the choke off, but it did stall. And actually it didn't fully get up to 3,600 RPM. So maybe I turned the choke off too soon, or maybe we're just a bit low on fuel. So I'm gonna just refill the carb and we'll try this again. Yeah, carb I think was low on fuel. Carb's been refilled. Let's try this again. I think that was definitely it. The engine speed, it's under control now. And it actually started a little bit slow the first time we started it. This time it started kind of slow, and then the engine speed started to pick up. So there's, I guess, two things that come to mind, maybe three. Either we have to back off that spring tension, possibly the shaft is slipping again on the governor arm, or maybe now the idle set is causing the issue. And I'm leaning towards the idle set. I actually haven't looked at the footage yet to see if this plate was right up against it, but that is a symptom of the idle set holding the throttle open, because as the engine warms up, what was a good speed suddenly becomes a faster speed. And that's kind of what I was seeing. The speed was ramping up as the engine was warming up. So I think I'm going to restart it and back this screw out, and I think we'll see the engine speed start to come down. And that was it. I'd say Jason got pretty lucky on this one. It was just a miscalibrated governor. So, I guess the question in my mind is, did that happen on its own, or did someone loosen that bolt and mess things up? I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that question, but what I do know is that someone definitely messed with that idle set screw, because once I brought that out, the engine speed settled down actually to 2,800 RPM. So I think whoever adjusted that idle set screw also backed off the spring tension on the governor. So I brought that back up close to 3,600 RPM, and the governor had full control of the engine. So, that we can fine tune later. I guess the biggest question in my mind is, why do generators like this have an idle set screw? They don't idle. And if you're going to have an idle set screw, why make it so long that you can actually over rev the engine with it? I mean, this was only driven in maybe a third of the way down. If I actually drove it all the way down, this engine would self-destruct within seconds. Anyway, let's get this back together, and I think we'll be ready to test it. So yeah, let's finish this up and get it outside. Just going to put a little bit of WD-40 on this breather tube. I don't think there's really any way to kind of press it in place, so hopefully it'll drop right in without fighting me. And these two bottom bolts, they can be left in as well. The airbox on the bottom, it is slotted, so I should be able to drop that onto these bolts, pop the top on, and then tighten everything down. And one thing worthy of noting on this airbox, usually there's metal bushings here, so when you tighten the airbox down to the carburetor, the plastic doesn't crack. And I found out the hard way on the last XG10000 I worked on. I tried to torque these to 60 inch-pounds. Usually I go to 60 or 70. And what happened was I broke one of these ears right off. So yeah, I'm not gonna be able to torque it to 60. I think I did 40 on the replacement airbox, and that worked out fine. Need to give the breather tube a little bit of help, so I'm just prying underneath it to force it onto the airbox. It's not clear to me where exactly this line is supposed to be routed. I have a feeling there must have been a small cutout somewhere in the missing chunk. So I guess we'll find out, because I did order a new cover. It's going to be here in a few weeks though. So I'm going to use the old cover to test with. It's still good enough to hold the air filter in place. I guess the only thing that's compromised is this right here. This is for summer or winter operation, and depending upon which way you have it, it opens either the baffle on the left or the one on the right. And right now the one on the left is open, so that means it's going to pull fresh air from this channel, and that pulls air actually off of the exhaust through this pipe right here. So that is for winter operation. It'll keep the carburetor from icing up. And in the other position, it's going to pull fresh air from this channel. And if this chunk wasn't missing, it would be pulling that air from this passage right here. And that is air from the cooling fan on the front of the engine. So with that chunk missing, it's going to mostly be pulling air actually from this area right here. So the air is going to be warmer than it would otherwise be with a non-damaged airbox. But for testing, I think this should be fine. But why didn't you tell me? You watched me do it. Forgot the two screws that go right there. These are not the best placement of these. Because if one happens to come loose, it's going right into the engine. Yeah, I don't think we're quite done yet. These leads go on the battery, therefore charging the battery when the generator is running. So I'm going to pull this bracket off. That'll let me tip the battery forward and get these reattached. All right, I think I'm ready to go here. I've got 9,000 watts of load on standby. Now, I did switch to the external tank because once I rolled this outside, I removed the cap for the tank to add some fuel, and it released quite a bit of pressure. So that rollover valve, which is the vent, does not seem to be working. So I'll have to order one of those as well. I'll probably give that and the new airbox cover to Jason to finish up. I think my part is pretty much done. I guess that's what we're going to find out. So the plan is to start it. We'll let it warm up. I'm going to adjust the engine speed, bring it close to 61.5 Hertz. We'll check the output, the THD, the sine wave, and then load it halfway. We'll double check the outputs and then bring it up to 9,000 watts and see how it does. I was wondering how this was going to test on the THD front. This is advertised as a low THD machine, and we saw exactly that. Without a load, it was around 2.5%, and under 9,000 watts, it only came up to about 4%. So this one actually beats the Gen Pro, which I tested a few months back. Like the Gen Pro, this is also a V-twin engine, and because of that, the engine runs smoother. There's less cavitation in the output. So that's partially why we see cleaner power. Also, the power head, like the Gen Pro, it is made out of copper and made in the US. So that makes a big difference. And I guess you get what you pay for, because this is over $2,000 brand new. Jason got a pretty good deal on it at $500, as it turns out. Anyway, As far as the voltage and the engine speed goes, I didn't see any issues there. At no load, we're at 123 volts, about 61.8 hertz after I adjusted the engine speed. And under 9,000 watts, we were holding at 118.5 volts, and I believe it was 58.7 hertz. And the sine wave looked good from no load to full load. So this is a decent machine. Definitely recommended if you're concerned about clean power. 4% is very safe for electronics. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.